The longboat crested the wave, salt spray washing over the shield rim as Sigrid Haraldsdottir stood firm at the prow. Her knuckles whitened around the carved dragon head as the vessel plunged forward. 20 warriors behind her raised their voices in a rowing song that matched the rhythm of their oars cutting through the cold northern waters, but Sigrid did not join them. "The omens are good," called Astrid, her father's second wife, adjusting her fur cloak against the biting wind. "Odin sends us favorable currents." Sigrid merely nodded, her eyes fixed on the distant shoreline of her homeland. After 3 successful raids along the Frankish coast, they were returning to Vestfold laden with silver, cloth, and honor. Yet her heart remained heavy as an anchor stone. "Your father awaits with news," Astrid continued, moving closer. "The alliance has been settled." Sigrid's jaw tightened. "So I am to be traded like a prize mare?" "You speak of marriage as though it were thraldom," Astrid chided. "This union will end the blood feud between our people and the Valgardson clans. 3 generations of vengeance, finally at rest. Your children will know peace." "Peace bought with my freedom," Sigrid muttered. She turned away from Astrid's disapproving gaze, focusing instead on the familiar fjord opening before them. The wedding price had been paid, the arrangements made. She was promised to Frodi Valgardson, heir to the Valgardson Jarls, a man she had never met, from a family whose hands were stained with the blood of her kinsmen. The blood feud had begun in her grandfather's time, when Valgardson raiders had slaughtered half her father's family over disputed hunting grounds. Vengeance had been sworn and carried out tenfold, until both families were diminished and weary. Now, her marriage would seal the fragile truce. As a shield-maiden who had earned her place in the raiding parties, Sigrid had always known her duty to her clan came before her own desires. But the old hatred ran deep in her veins. How could she give herself to the son of her family's enemies? How could any union born of such bitter soil ever bear sweet fruit? The longship entered the fjord, and the familiar smoke of home hearths rose like greeting fingers from the valley. Sigrid's hand fell instinctively to the amulet at her throat, Freya's symbol, given by her mother before death took her. "The goddess knows a warrior's heart," her mother had whispered, "but she also knows a woman's." "What would you have me do, mother?" Sigrid whispered to the wind. "How can I honor our dead while sharing furs with those who sent them to Valhalla?" The village appeared around the bend, wooden buildings clustered along the shore, longhouses rising behind them. Figures gathered at the shoreline, awaiting their return. Among them would be her father, Harald the Fair-Spoken, who had arranged this marriage without consulting her wishes. "You will find your way," Astrid said softly, as if hearing Sigrid's thoughts. "You have always been stubborn, but never foolish. The gods have a purpose for this union." "The gods care nothing for our small lives," Sigrid replied, though she touched the amulet once more, seeking courage. When they landed, Harald embraced his daughter fiercely, pride evident in his eyes as he inspected the wealth they had brought home. "You have done well, Sigrid. The raids were successful. 3 ships taken, no warriors lost," she reported, falling easily into the role of his second-in-command rather than his daughter. "Good. There is much to prepare. The Valgardson party arrives in 3 days' time for the thing and the betrothal ceremony." Harald's voice lowered. "I know this is not the path you would have chosen, daughter, but it is necessary. Our people need this peace." Sigrid met her father's gaze, seeing the weight of leadership in his eyes. "I understand my duty," she said stiffly. "I will not shame our family." The next days passed in a flurry of preparations. The village buzzed with excitement for both the thing, the assembly where disputes would be settled and laws upheld, and the alliance to be formalized through her marriage. Sigrid threw herself into training, working with sword and shield until her muscles screamed, seeking exhaustion as a shield against her thoughts. On the morning the Halogallan ships were expected, Sigrid stood at the edge of the forest, bow in hand, seeking solitude before she must don the finery of a jarl's daughter rather than a warrior's leathers. An elk moved through the undergrowth, and she drew back her bowstring, steadying her breath as she had been taught since childhood. The snap of a twig behind her broke her concentration. The arrow flew wide as she whirled, drawing her knife in one fluid motion. A tall figure stood watching her, dressed in traveling clothes of quality but splattered with mud from the forest paths. His beard was trimmed shorter than most Norsemen, framing a face that might have been carved from the mountainside, all angles and weathered plains. Eyes the color of a winter sea regarded her with frank curiosity. "Your form is excellent," he said, "though your awareness of surroundings could improve." Sigrid kept her knife raised. "These are Harald's hunting grounds." "State your business, stranger." The man's mouth quirked slightly. "I became separated from my traveling party. I believe they continued toward the settlement while I took a wrong path." Something in his accent struck Sigrid as familiar. The particular way he formed his words marked him as northern. "Halogalland, perhaps?" Her grip tightened on her knife. "The village lies that way," she said, gesturing with her free hand. "Follow the stream down." Instead of leaving, the man leaned against a tree, arms crossed. "You're not what I expected." "And what did you expect?" "Harald's daughter is said to be a great beauty, skilled in all womanly arts," he replied. They did not mention her prowess with weapons. Ice flooded Sigrid's veins. This was no random traveler lost in the woods. "You're Halogalland," she accused. He inclined his head. "Frodi Valgardson, at your service." His eyes flickered to her knife, still pointed at his chest. "Though I had hoped for a warmer welcome from my intended bride." Sigrid's world narrowed to this moment, this man, her enemy by blood, her husband by arrangement. She should have recognized him immediately. The Valgardsons were known for their height and their sea-colored eyes, just as her own family was known for flame-red hair. "I could kill you where you stand," she said, the words escaping before wisdom could catch them. One less Valgardson to trouble the world. To her surprise, Frodi laughed, a deep sound that seemed to startle birds from nearby branches. "You could try. But I think we both know that would restart a feud our families have sacrificed much to end." His eyes grew serious. "Including your freedom and mine." The knife wavered in Sigrid's hand. "You speak as though you too were forced into this arrangement. Did you think I leapt with joy at the prospect of marrying Harald Fairspeaker's daughter? The woman whose uncles killed my father's brothers? Whose cousins burned our storehouse and salting shed?" Frodi shook his head. "We are both pawns in this game of peace, Sigrid Haraldsdottir." The truth of his words struck her like a physical blow. She had been so consumed by her own resentment that she had never considered he might share it. Slowly, she lowered her knife. "Then why come alone to the forest? Why not wait for the formal introduction?" Frodi's expression softened. "I wanted to see you as you are, not as you would present yourself before the thing. I wanted to know if I could look upon your face without seeing only the blood between our families." He took a step forward, then paused. "May I approach without fear of that knife finding my ribs?" Despite everything, Sigrid felt the corner of her mouth lift. "For now." She sheathed her blade and studied him more carefully. He moved like a warrior, confident and measured, but there was something else in his bearing, a thoughtfulness she had not expected from a Halogalland man. "Walk with me," he asked, gesturing toward a path that led along the ridge overlooking the fjord. Against her better judgment, Sigrid fell into step beside him. They walked in silence for a time, the only sounds their footfalls on the forest floor and distant calling of gulls. 3 days ago, Frodi finally said, I stood before my father and told him I would rather die in Holmgang than marry the daughter of Harald Fair Speaker. Sigrid glanced at him sharply. And yet here you are. Here I am, he agreed. Because my father reminded me that 100 years of vengeance has left both our clans weakened. The Christians press from the south, and eastern raiders grow bolder each season. We cannot stand divided. They reached the ridge, and below them stretched the fjord, sunlight dancing on its surface. In the distance, long ships with Halogalland sails approached the harbour. Official arrival. They will be expecting us both, Sigrid said, suddenly aware of her dishevelled appearance after her morning hunt. Frodi studied her face. Before we go down to them, before we become what they need us to be, tell me one truth, Sigrid Haraldsdottir. Can you set aside the past for the future of our people? The question hung between them, weighted with generations of bloodshed and grief. Sigrid wanted to hate this man, to hold fast to the bitter stories she had been raised on. Yet standing before her was not the monster of her imagination but a man caught in the same tide of duty and history as herself. I don't know, she answered honestly. But I am willing to try. Something shifted in Frodi's expression, a respect, perhaps, for her honesty. Then we begin with truth between us, if nothing else. As they descended toward the village, walking side by side but not touching, Sigrid felt the steady drumbeat of her heart quicken whenever she glanced at his profile. It was not love, could not be, not yet, but perhaps it was the first fragile seed of possibility. The formal introduction before the thing was everything Sigrid had dreaded, stiff formalities exchanged between families who had spent generations trying to destroy one another. She stood beside her father in her finest dress, hair braided with silver threads, while Frodi and his father, Valgard the Unyielding, presented the bride price, land deeds, silver, and finely crafted weapons. Throughout the ceremony, Sigrid found her eyes drawn to Frodi, searching for the man she had met in the forest rather than this formal stranger in ceremonial clothing. Once, she caught him watching her with the same puzzled intensity, and something warm unfurled in her chest. That evening, during the feast, Harald raised his drinking horn. Today marks the end of blood and the beginning of kinship, he declared. My daughter, shield-maiden and pride of our clan, will join with Frodi Valgardson when the summer wanes. May their children know only peace between our houses. Cheers echoed through the hall, though Sigrid noted the forced smiles of older warriors who had lost too much to the feud to celebrate its end with true joy. Her own uncle, Gunnar on one hand, refused to drink the toast, staring into his cup with undisguised resentment. Later, as musicians played and mead flowed freely, Frodi approached her. Your uncle does not approve, he observed, following her gaze to where Gunnar sat brooding. He lost his wife and son to a Halogalland raid, Sigrid replied. And his hand to your uncle's axe. Frodi's jaw tightened. And my mother lost her life giving birth to my stillborn sister after your kinsman burned our home, forcing us to flee in winter. The old anger rose between them, threatening the fragile understanding they had found in the forest. Sigrid looked away, struggling to master her emotions. This is why I questioned whether this marriage can truly bring peace, she said quietly. Too much blood has been spilled. Yet here we stand, Frodi replied, his voice gentling. Not as enemies, though not yet as friends. He offered his hand, palm up. Will you walk with me? The stars are bright tonight. Conscious of many eyes upon them, Sigrid hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. Together they left the noise of the feast hall for the quiet of the spring night. The air was crisp but not bitter, and overhead, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance. In Halogalland, Frodi said as they followed a path along the shore, there is a belief that the stars are the eyes of our ancestors, watching our deeds. We say they are the sparks from Thor's hammer, Sigrid replied. Perhaps they are both. Frodi stopped, turning to face her. The moonlight silvered his features, softening them. I have a proposal. Sigrid raised an eyebrow. Beyond the one already arranged for us. His smile was quick and unexpectedly warm. Until our wedding at summer's end, let us meet each day, not as Valgarson and Vestfold, not as Valgardson and Haraldsdottir, but as Frodi and Sigrid. Let us learn who we are beyond the blood of our fathers. The proposal was both simple and radical. To set aside generations of hatred, to see each other as individuals rather than extensions of their clans. Sigrid's first instinct was to refuse, to maintain the wall of righteous anger that had protected her heart. But something in Frodi's earnest gaze made her consider another path. Each day until the wedding, she agreed finally. But I make no promises beyond listening. That is all I ask. Frodi reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The simple touch sent an unexpected warmth through her. Until tomorrow, then, Sigrid Haraldsdottir. As he walked away, Sigrid pressed her hand to her chest, surprised to find her heart racing. This was not how she had expected to feel in the presence of a Valgardson. Confusion, yes. Duty, certainly. But not this strange, fluttering anticipation that made her both yearn for and dread the coming dawn. True to his word, Frodi sought her out each day that followed. They walked the boundaries of their joined lands, sailed along the coast in a small fishing boat, and spoke of their lives. Sigrid learned that Frodi was both a warrior and a skilled woodcarver, that he had travelled as far south as the great trading city of Hedeby, that he preferred the quieter forest paths to the noise of mead halls. In turn, she showed him her favourite places, the hidden waterfall where she had learned to swim, the high cliff where eagles nested, the ancient oak where she came to think when decisions weighed heavily. She spoke of raids and trading voyages, of her training as both shield-maiden and her father's heir. Your father allowed you to train with weapons? Frodi asked one afternoon as they sat atop a coastal cliff, watching fishing boats return with the tide. That is uncommon. My mother insisted, Sigrid replied, picking at the grass beside her. She was from the eastern lands, where women often fought alongside men. She said a jarl's daughter should know how to defend her people if need arose. She sounds formidable. She was. Sigrid's voice softened with memory. She died when I was 12, defending our settlement from raiders while the men were away. She killed 7 before falling. Frodi was quiet for a long moment. Was it our people? Valgarson men? The question hung between them, dangerous as a drawn blade. Sigrid could have lied, could have stoked his guilt to maintain the distance between them. But the weeks of knowing him had changed something fundamental in her understanding of their family's feud. No, she admitted. They were from across the eastern sea. Beardless men with tattoos on their faces. Relief visibly washed over Frodi's features, and he reached for her hand. After a moment's hesitation, Sigrid allowed her fingers to intertwine with his. They sat in companionable silence as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. Tomorrow, Frodi said finally, my father wishes to take me on a hunt with your kinsman. A show of unity before the thing concludes. Sigrid nodded. The thing had continued its business throughout their daily meetings, disputes settled, marriages arranged, laws upheld. Soon the Valgarson party would return home until the wedding at summer's end. Be watchful, she warned. Not all my people are pleased with this alliance. Especially Gunnar. I can handle one bitter old man, Frodi assured her, but something in his tone made Sigrid's skin prickle with unease. The hunting party left at dawn the next day, Frodi and Valgard alongside Harald, Gunnar, and several warriors from both clans. Sigrid watched them go from the doorway of her father's longhouse, a sense of foreboding settling over her like an ill-fitting cloak. By midday, her unease had grown so profound that she could not sit still. Taking her bow and knife, she slipped away from the settlement and into the forest, following the hunting trails toward where the men had gone. She told herself she was merely restless, that her concern was unnecessary. Yet her steps quickened when she heard no sounds of pursuit or celebration that would indicate a successful hunt. The forest was unnaturally quiet when she came upon the first body, one of her father's men, an arrow through his throat. Heart-pounding, Sigrid dropped to a defensive crouch, scanning the surrounding trees for movement. Another body lay several paces away, a Valgard warrior, his chest gaping from a vicious sword wound. Ambush! Moving silently as she had been trained, Sigrid followed the signs of struggle deeper into the forest. More bodies appeared, men from both parties, their blood mingling on the forest floor. Then she heard it, the clash of weapons, grunts of exertion, voices raised in anger. She crested a small rise to find a nightmarish scene below. Her father and Valgard stood back to back, defending against four attackers dressed in the furs of mountain dwellers, raiders from inland who preyed on coastal settlements. Nearby, Frodi fought two more, his sword a blur of deadly precision despite blood flowing from a wound in his side. There was no sign of Gunnar or the other missing warriors. Without hesitation, Sigrid narked an arrow and let it fly, striking one of the raiders attacking Frodi. The man fell with a gurgling cry, drawing the attention of the others. She had time for two more shots, each finding its mark, before they charged toward her position. Dropping her bow, Sigrid drew her knife and scrambled down the slope to join the fight. She reached Frodi's side just as he dispatched his remaining opponent with a thrust through the chest. Sigrid! He grabbed her arm, his eyes wild with concern and battle fury. What are you doing here? Saving your life, it seems, she retorted, turning to face the ongoing battle. Together they moved to aid their fathers, who had managed to reduce their attackers to two. With their combined effort, the fight ended quickly. 6 raiders lay dead around them, but the cost had been high. Of the 12 men who had left that morning, only the 4 of them remained standing. Harald slumped against a tree, pressing a hand to a deep gash in his thigh. Mountain raiders, he spat. They must have been watching the settlement, waiting for an opportunity. Where is Gunnar? Sigrid asked, tearing strips from her tunic to bind Frodi's wound. And the others? A dark look passed between Harald and Valgard. Gunnar guided us to this hunting ground, Valgard said grimly. He knew these raiders would be here. No. Sigrid's hand stilled. Gunnar would never betray his own people. Not his people, Harald said heavily. Just the Valgard clan. And me, for making peace with them. He closed his eyes briefly. He and 3 others separated from us just before the ambush. They led us into a trap. Frodi's hand covered Sigrid's, still pressed against his wound. He meant to restart the blood feud. With both Jarls dead, killed while hunting together. The peace would be shattered, Valgard finished. Both clans would blame the other for treachery. Sigrid felt sick. Her uncle, who had bounced her on his knee as a child, who had taught her to track deer through summer forests, had been willing to sacrifice his own brother, his own people, for vengeance. We must return to the settlement, she said, helping her father to his feet. Gunnar will spread word of your deaths. If both of you appear together, alive and united, his plot will be revealed. The journey back was slow and painful. Harald could barely walk, leaning heavily on his daughter, while Frodi supported Valgard, whose arm had been badly wounded. Night was falling by the time they reached the edge of the forest overlooking the village. Below, chaos had erupted. Warriors from both clans faced each other with drawn weapons. In the center of the confrontation stood Gunnar, his one hand raised as he shouted accusations at the Valgallant men. Behind him, the three warriors who had joined his betrayal stood with arrows narked, ready for bloodshed. "We must stop this," Harald gasped, but he could barely stand, much less intervene in a brewing battle. Sigrid and Frodi exchanged a look of perfect understanding. Without words, they helped their fathers to a sheltered spot, then moved to the edge of the clearing. The confrontation below had escalated, with more warriors joining each side, drawn by Gunnar's inflammatory claims that the Valgallant men had murdered their jarl. "Together?" Frodi asked, taking Sigrid's hand. She nodded, fingers tightening around his. "Together." They emerged from the forest side by side, walking steadily down the slope toward the gathered warriors. A hush fell over the crowd as they were spotted, their joined hands a shocking sight that momentarily froze the brewing violence. "Enough!" Sigrid's voice carried across the clearing, trained by years of calling commands in battle. "Our fathers live. The jarls of both clans live." Gunnar whirled to face them, his expression transforming from righteous anger to naked fear. "Sigrid? What trickery is this? Where is your father?" "Safe," she replied, never breaking stride as she and Frodi approached. "No thanks to you, uncle. You led them into an ambush." Murmurs swept through the gathered warriors. Gunnar's face flushed dark red. "Lies! The Valgallant dogs turned on us, as I always warned they would." "It was mountain raiders who attacked," Frodi countered, his voice carrying with the authority of a future jarl. "Raiders that Gunnar knew would be hunting in those woods. Raiders he deliberately led our fathers toward, then abandoned them to die. Would you believe the word of a Valgardson over your own blood?" Gunnar appealed to the Vestfold warriors, desperation edging his voice. "I believe what I saw with my own eyes," Sigrid replied, coming to stand directly before her uncle. "I believe the words of my father and Jarl Valgard, who even now recover from wounds sustained fighting back-to-back against the true enemy." Frodi moved to her side, his shoulder brushing hers in silent support. "The blood feud ends today," he declared. "Not by marriage alone, but by the blood spilled together against a common foe. Valgardson and Haraldsdottir warriors died side by side today. Their sacrifice must not be forgotten or dishonored by continuing ancient hatreds." Gunnar's hand moved to his sword, eyes darting between the gathered warriors. Finding no support among his own people, he lunged forward with a cry of rage, blade aimed at Frodi's heart. Without hesitation, Sigrid stepped into her uncle's path, knife drawn. Steel met steel with a ringing clash that echoed across the suddenly silent clearing. 3 rapid exchanges, and Gunnar's sword flew from his hand. Sigrid's blade pressed against his throat. "For the sake of my father, who loves you despite your betrayal, I will not take your life," she said, voice low but carrying in the stillness. "But you are hereby outlawed from these lands. By tomorrow's dawn, you must be gone, never to return on pain of death. You choose them over your own blood." Gunnar's voice broke with disbelief. Sigrid glanced at Frodi, standing tall despite his wound, and felt a certainty settle in her heart. "I choose peace over endless vengeance. I choose the future over the past." She lowered her blade. "Go now, before my father returns and must witness your shame." Gunnar's 3 co-conspirators were quickly disarmed and bound. As they were led away, Frodi turned to face the gathered warriors of both clans. "Today we learned that the greatest threat comes not from each other but from those who would exploit our division," he called out. "United, our clans can defend against any who would threaten our people. Divided, we fall." A murmur of agreement passed through the crowd. Old enemies regarded each other with new eyes, recognizing the truth in his words. The immediate danger of violence had passed, though Sigrid knew it would take more than one day to heal generations of mistrust. As the crowd dispersed to tend to the wounded jarls, now being carried down from their shelter position, Frodi turned to Sigrid. Blood had soaked through his makeshift bandage, yet his eyes were clear and focused solely on her face. "You saved my life twice today," he said quietly. "Once with your bow, and once with your body between mine and your uncle's blade." "Why?" Sigrid looked up at him, this man who had begun as her enemy and somehow become essential to her future. "Because somewhere between duty and fate, I found my heart had made its own choice." Frodi's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite the calluses of a warrior. "And what did your heart choose, Sigrid Haraldsdottir?" Instead of answering with words, Sigrid rose to her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was brief but filled with promise, a bridge across the chasm of their family's history. When she pulled back, Frodi's eyes had darkened to the color of the deep fjord. "I choose you," she said simply. "Not because our fathers commanded it, but because in you I found honor, courage, and truth." Frodi smiled, the expression transforming his solemn face. "Then we are well matched, for my heart made the same choice." He took her hand, raising it to his lips. "When the summer wanes, I will proudly call you wife, not for peace between our clans, but for the love that grew despite all odds against it." 3 moons later, as summer's golden light began to soften toward autumn, Sigrid stood beside the ceremonial fire in the center of her father's hall. Dressed in her mother's wedding gown, hair adorned with flowers and silver beads, she watched as Frodi approached from the opposite side of the flame. The hall was filled with members of both clans, their faces no longer locked in suspicion but open with cautious goodwill. In the months since Gunnar's betrayal, small gestures of friendship had begun to heal ancient wounds. Joint fishing expeditions, shared feasts, warriors training together, each step small but significant. Harald, recovered from his wounds but still walking with a slight limp, placed Sigrid's hand in Frodi's. Valgard did the same for his son, the 2 jarls completing the circle around the sacred fire. "Before gods and men," the priestess intoned, binding their hands with a cord of red silk, "these 2 are joined. As their blood mingles, so too shall their clans become one. What hatred has divided, let love unite." Frodi's eyes never left Sigrid's as they spoke the traditional vows. When he slipped his family's ancestral ring onto her finger, his hands were steady despite the solemnity of the moment. "With this ring, I offer not just my name and protection, but my heart," he added, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Forever bound to yours, shield-maiden of my soul." Sigrid's throat tightened with emotion. "And I bind my heart to yours," she replied softly, "warrior of my choosing." As mead was poured and the wedding feast began, Sigrid looked around at the mingled clans celebrating together. The impossible had become reality, not through force or political maneuvering, but through 2 people willing to see beyond blood feuds to the humanity in each other's eyes. Later, as they stood together under a sky ablaze with stars, Frodi drew her close. "Do you remember what I said about the stars being the eyes of our ancestors?" Sigrid nodded, following his gaze upward. "Do you think they approve of what we've done?" "Some may not," he admitted, "but I believe most look down with relief that their descendants have found a better way." His arms tightened around her. "Our children will know only peace between our people. They will hear stories of brave warriors and shield maidens, but not of hatred that consumed generations." "Our children," Sigrid echoed, resting her head against his chest. "Future jarls of a united people." The night wind carried the sounds of celebration from the hall, laughter and song replacing the clash of weapons. Somewhere in the darkness, a raven called, Odin's messenger, bearing witness to the night's promises. Frodi tilted her face up to his. When we first met in the forest, did you truly consider killing me? Sigrid smiled, remembering her knife pointed at his chest and the unexpected laughter that had disarmed her. For a moment. And now I cannot imagine a world without you in it. The gods work in mysterious ways, he murmured, bending to kiss her. They gave us hatred to overcome so that we might know the true value of love freely chosen. As their lips met beneath the watchful stars, Sigrid silently thanked whatever threads of fate had woven their lives together. From arranged marriage to chosen love, from blood feud to lasting peace, their journey had only just begun, but already it had transformed two peoples and two hearts forever.